So when I saw that, I was like, is there anything else like this? And I looked, and it's far and few between. But that made me realize, oh, there isn't. Because, yeah, it's like if you see something that you've never seen before in a place you've never seen it, you realize the lack of it around you. It's like seeing color for the first time. You realize there's just not enough around you. That makes sense. I don't know. That was a
No,
rant.
that's a really great metaphor. I really like that.
Well,
Yes, Darla?
Darla.
Sarah, your design for the combat wheelchair and the conversation it started, plus response to the haters, wound up inspiring a bunch of stuff for a game I am working on, which I wound up playtesting this past Metatopies, about making a setting that is aggressively accessible as well as absolute queer positivity in a high fantasy setting.
No, that sounds really amazing, and I am very, humbled and very grateful that I've inspired you, and my chair has inspired you. So yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for letting me know.
That is aggressively accessible as
Yeah, definitely not to diminish like the work, Sarah, you personally did to make all this, but it's really cool how like one single thing can kind of sprout like the root of a tree into so many different people being like, oh, I can do this too. And it just kind of snowballs in that way.
It's kind of amazing as well, that I put it out there, and within a couple of weeks, I was being tagged in people who do D&D art for people and how they were getting commissioned for wheelchair using characters. And one artist even reached out and said, like, I actually had to learn how to draw a wheelchair, which was something that they'd never thought of before. So that was really cool that, it got them to think about it. And also as well, in a couple of weeks after, I started getting tagged in things like, here's a subclass I've made but designed all around it. And I thought that was just really cool, like seeing people's creativity and seeing that the rules can definitely accommodate for disability. It was just that it was never made with disability in mind in the first place, and that was the problem, and still is the problem with D&D and a lot of other tabletop games.
Yeah, Joe, you were talking earlier about wanting to take out the negative pointers. Do you want to talk more about that?
Oh yeah, so in Mutants and Masterminds, I remember like you could have poor eyesight, you could be mute, you could have all these different disabilities and get those negative points to spend elsewhere to like buff your other powers or buff your stats. And it's like, it is kind of weird that, I think being mute was like -2 points, but it's like, okay, so you're taking a penalty for being mute to get points elsewhere. Also, by the way, it's hard to see, but I do actually have decals on my prosthesis. Like,
Cool.
because why not? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like with some of the projects I'm working on personally now, like you said with that whole why negatives, like they don't really need to exist. And if they do, it has to be like for a very specific thing. So for example, I've made joint supports for characters that have very bad hypermobility syndrome like me. And when they don't wear their joint supports and they're going into, battle, for example, if they're a witcher and they're supposed to be fighting a monster and they have a very bad dislocating knee, they definitely need the joint support. So it's a thing where they can choose not to wear it, but they would have like, a -1 to just their reflex, which isn't a lot in terms of the witcher. So it's just something like it would twinge a lot whenever you're kind of throwing yourself around. It's meant to replicate that. And then you put the support on and you take no negatives at all. Like there shouldn't be anything like that. And a lot of the other stuff in the PDF as well is more about role playing it rather than mechanics. Mechanics only step in when there really needs to be mechanics. But other than that, no, like a lot of it is role playing. I found that you can do with a few little mechanics and stuff to add, I guess, or flesh it out a little bit in terms of gameplay.
That's a good point. Darla, do you have something to say?
It is the assumption that disability is by default not accommodated. With superheroes, I am less interested in how many extra points their disabilities give them than I am interested in how their powers and equipment does or does not accommodate them. Why should that cost you extra points instead of just being a given?
Hmm. Yeah. And like even in terms of, I've seen tabletop games where like mobility aids and like disability aids and items to help characters with disabilities tend to be far more like disgustingly priced than a lot of other things on the table, and they treat it like, oh, it's a new invention. It's like, no, it's not a new invention. Like, it doesn't need to be that. You've made it a new invention and therefore it's got to cost that much. Whereas if you just say
Art imitates life on the pricing there.
Yeah, like it should just be a thing. And in one of the projects I'm working on, I've even made it that if your character's good at crafting, they can craft their own, like, and just make their own ones. And like it has little diagrams on how to do it and things like that. So you know that there's no reason that it should ever cost a character anything to be disabled. And like I think that's kind of replicated as like the failing that we have in our society, you know, that we charge disabled people extortionate amounts for disability items and medicines, and therefore when people go to fantasy worlds they think it must be like that, and it's like, it doesn't need to be. You're bringing your own kind of prejudice with you to it. And you know, you can actually you can make that prosthetic leg very reasonably priced. You could also make the medicines very reasonably priced, or if they're out in adventuring around, they can make those medicines themselves, or like pluck herbs and things and like know where to find them and things like that. There's no real reason it needs to be like it is currently in our world, which is very flawed. And you know, you can make something very positive out of it.
Amanda, do you have something to say?
Yeah, it's sort of a question for Sarah, but you mentioned that a large amount of this PDF is instructions on role-playing it. Do you envision a lot of this, and are you writing this for general populations to comfortably play a disabled character? And if so, yeah.
It's made like for disabled players, and that's the audience that I'm aiming for with it. But I have put things in there like, you know, for people who genuinely do want to role play a disabled character and want to learn and you know, learn from the experience about it, that I've put little things in like role playing tips or explaining exactly what this disability is and where they can find more resources about it. You know, I've put like names of even for one of the subjects is acromegaly, which is gigantism. And I was like, okay, I've referenced sources that people can go to, and I also referenced that you know, there are actors in our very real world who have this disability, like Ron Perlman, who plays Hellboy, for example. And you know, I put one of the pages up just as like a preview page, and it had that on it, and people were like, I had no idea Ron Perlman even had a disability. And I was like, yeah, a lot of people don't know, but he does. And you know, like they were then able to like go and research the condition and learn about it that way. So the PDF itself, the things I make are always for a disabled audience, and like that's who I have in mind when I make them. But I also put in things because I am aware that there are people out there who do want to role play sensitively, and you know, do want to learn through the experience of playing a character, which is, you know, fine so long as they have the resources there and can do it sensitively and correctly, and are aware of, you know, the kind of tropes and the stereotypes that they should avoid, and things like that.
So this could be potentially like a really great resource for like a game master looking to like create NPCs to make their worlds more realistic and potentially like make their table more inclusive in general.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. For example, there's a part in it where I talk about how sign languages in our world have been a part of society since I think we've dated it back to ancient Egypt. And a lot of the time, sign language was used as a way to trade commerce, because when people from different places interacted and didn't know each other's languages, they could do it through hand signs instead. And there were even systems of saying how much you wanted of something by holding fingers up and counting the knuckles on your hand and things like that. So I was like, okay, well, I'll make a common sign language and I'll write down all the rules for how it works if you want to put it in your game. And then there are even rules for GMs if for example, they wanted to craft their own version of a sign language, like how they could do it. And there's even rules for players in the game if they want to have like a secret language in their like friend group that only they know, like they can go around making that and how they would do it. So yeah, like it's just small things like that that really add realism and diversity and flavor to a world.
Well, I would just say that I definitely support the idea 100%. And I've observed like what we're talking about is often seen in systems that have like merits and flaws. And it's strangely it works to continue this idea within role-playing games that if you pile on a bunch of what they call flaws, like if you're hard of hearing or mute or blind or whatever your character may be, well, here's some extra points. Now you can get a really powerful merit, It's very dismissive of the challenges that this should introduce for the character as well. And it emphasizes, well, disability will make you powerful in a bizarre way, where really, I think it can be more normalized than that rather than making it seem like a reward.
I think on that note, it's kind of in a similar how you'll see people, as somebody who is autistic, and savants is a big topic that comes up. It's one of the only, it's one of the major tropes that's displayed in media. It's incredibly frustrating. It's not, the thing is disabled people are people. Having a disability is a part of our everyday life, be it whatever it may be. And even to loop back around of like, being disabled, the equipment you get can be so incredibly expensive. And then media, be it, a movie or role play, however, it all kind of ties in of like, it's then displayed as expensive. But it doesn't have to be, like we talked about, and it doesn't have to be somebody's super powerful or gets this kind of trade-off, or it's this super negative. It can just be a part of people's daily lives. And Sarah, I love, love, love that one of the major things you focus on is the smaller, intricate things about characters' daily lives. Because at the end of the day, that is what being these characters, playing these characters is supposed to be. It's supposed to be being in their shoes and living out these adventures, but you have this little extra little thing about you, like anybody else's extra things about them, that adds to that character. Like it shouldn't be any different than that. And it's so frustrating to see, like you said, in merit and flaw systems as a flaw instead of a neutral, and then let the character decide what that means. Let the player decide what that means. It's by default a negative. And that's not saying that, challenges shouldn't be shown. It's saying let that character be a character and not just their disability or ignore the disability completely, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like the whole like you have to take loads of penalties in order to get like this kind of big gain or power from it. It kind of like perpetuates the idea that disability has to happen for a reason. And that's not how disability works. And I do try to make that clear in my work, you know, that I don't try and say, if this and this happens and you become disabled because of this, it's just you are disabled. This is the disability you have, and here's what you can do. Like in terms of like role play and such, you know, that disability should never have to be justified. You know, disabled people shouldn't have to justify their existence. I think it's ridiculous. And I think that that whole like, you know, taking loads of penalties to gain one great big positive kind of perpetuates that idea that it must happen for a reason, otherwise it shouldn't be happening. I think it's just a kind of really weird thing that they perpetuate.
So Darla, I saw a strong reaction from you to earlier. Do you want to speak more on savants?
We also don't have to go full simulation in how disabilities are modeled in games. They don't necessarily need full rules as much as an assumption of accommodation with challenges modeled in the roleplay rather than rules.
Mhm.
But yes, I have something to say about savants.
I'm excited to hear it.
Wide that word from your vocabulary. Where autism is concerned, Rain Man is not an accurate portrayal of autism, but that is what people go to whenever they want to talk about an autistic person being good at something, as if we can only be redeemed by having a marketable skill of some kind. I have a whole rant about a psychic savant class that Palladium Games wrote back in the 90s that was steeped in mental age and functioning labels, and it was everything you should not do when writing disability in a game.
Yeah. I think the 90s was, I feel like, real big on that, of in media in general, of why did what, but yeah, unfortunately, and this obviously isn't limited to being autistic. It's with disability in general, and really with anything that you don't see in your daily life yourself, right? We learn about the majority of things that are different from us via media, TV shows, movies, comics, books, and now more and more role-playing games. So it's incredibly unfortunate that it continues to be this, you have to have something special about you, or something that can make a profit or be useful, in order to also be an autistic person in the media, or also be a person with a disability who's in the media, and that, or in role play. And that's, frustration doesn't really cover it, does it? Because then, and here's the real big kicker for me, when it comes to that, then it puts disabled people to have to correct those assumptions.
Mhm.
It then puts the labor directly on us, and we all know how much harder it is to unlearn something than it is to learn something. So to re-educate somebody, which shouldn't be our job in the first place, again, it's so frustrating. And it's arguably worse in role-playing games, because then you have people who are directly trying to portray that. And when you do that, it connects deeper, right? It makes that more sense of self. It makes that more sense of awareness, or it feels that way. So when it's portrayed that way, if a person's trying to portray a person with a disability, then it's going to connect to them that, oh yeah, this has got to be the way it is, because obviously they wouldn't have made you play this out so what's the word, in depth. Otherwise, I would like to loop back around though and say, I absolutely agree that a game doesn't have to have mechanics around disability, but I know a lot of people like myself who thrive on structure, right? Who would rather have, and not the way it is now, obviously, but have a base layer of a decent way to play disability on a mechanic system and on a mechanic level, and not just a role play level, and have that portrayed, and then remove what you don't need. Because I personally, and I know a lot of people who are the same way, struggle if there's not that really good foundation and those stepping stones. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's something in my personal project that I really tried to account for, because I had spoken on Twitter about it, and I had people, say the same things you're saying, Faith, about it. It was, there's like a bit at the beginning of just the entire document that says, like, none of these are rigid, this is how you have to play the disability. And I go in, I make the disclaimer, disability is a spectrum, it is not a monolith, everyone's experiences are very unique to them, and the rules actually account for, they're divided into sections like the mechanics are for each subsection of disability. There's a subset, like mechanics sections underneath, and basically it says, like, choose the ones that most apply to your experience, and if there is something that you like and then something that you don't like, is remove it. And also the document also encourages you to take the base structure of what I've put out there and add on to it, and tailor it to meet your own experiences and what you want to portray through your character. I always try and give what you said, really, but like that kind of not bare bones, but that kind of bone structure of, like, mechanics, and then a player can add and take away according to their experience with their disability. Because, and especially, like, when you have a condition that's very symptomatic based, so like with symptomatic disabilities, like, you could have one person have a condition and then another person have the exact same condition but wildly different symptoms. So the PDF tries to account for that and says, pick the ones that are most relevant to you, that you feel are most relevant to you, and disregard any of the ones that you don't agree with or that don't apply to you. And I think it's really important to have that flexibility, because that there has to be flexibility anyway in character creation in games, and I kind of perceive it to be a part of that. That there has to be, like, a lot of flexibility, because, like I said, disability isn't a monolith. So it's finding that balance between rules and also letting a player explore their own experience that's very unique to them. So I always feel it's that kind of give and take of, you need to provide at least something for people to work with, and then let them tailor and adjust it according to what experiences they want to portray.
Analogy popped into my head. if anybody ever colored in coloring books when they were little, I don't know many kids who only did what the coloring book said, but it was a fantastic place to start. It was a wonderful place to start doing art. It was a wonderful way to like get that creativity going.
Amanda only went inside the lines.
You only colored inside the, but did you like?
Matter of fact, I traced inside the lines very neatly,
Okay, I did
so
that too.
I wouldn't be tempted to even make a mistake.
I did that too at first, but okay,
But that's
like
the OCD side of my other problems.
yeah. Okay, that's fair. Not the best, but I mean, that's a good example, actually. No, it is. That's an even better example. Some people want to stick with that structure, and that's totally okay. You can still create a beautiful work of art that's unique to you because everybody's going to color differently or paint by numbers differently. So even if you I bet you if you had two people, no, I know if you had two people who created, went based on the same colors, did the same instructions, you would still come out with two different pictures. I think you said you work with kids, didn't you say, Amanda? I'm sure you've given two kids the exact same of instructions, and they tried hard to a T to follow it, but they came out with two different projects.
Oh, every time.
Yeah. And that's great. That's great. It should always be a good thing to have that diversity where it's like, oh, okay, so I'm still gonna like follow these rules and do these things, or I'm gonna go a little off the beaten path. It's the same with characters. It really is. It's the same with writing. And on that note, I wanted to say before I forget, because I will. Like she said, disability is not a monolith. Nothing is ever going to be able to encompass. One character is never going to be able to encompass everything that even the most specific of disabilities means to somebody. It's just not, and that's okay, as long as it's not derogatory, right? That's where I stand on that.
And I think that part of the equation here, though, is going to be teaching GMs who are not necessarily disabled or who do not have much experience with disability to include disabled characters in a positive way. Because, for example, not that long ago, I was doing a D&D game, and we rolled our attributes, and I had one that was really, really low. And I decided I was going to put the low number in a physical attribute and have a physical disability on my character. And the GM's automatic response, like a reflex response, is why would you weaken your character like that? And my response was, why am I putting mechanics ahead of the color and flavor of my character, of the role play? And that's, I think, a hurdle that will have to be overcome.
You kind of miss the RP and the RPG.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And we've all, not everybody's going to play with super heavy role play, but there's role play elements in pretty much every RPG you do, at least a little bit. And to restrict a person because you want them to display some type of art, what is it, archetype? Art. I always want to say archetype because that's how it's spelled. Don't lie, but I think it's supposed to be archetype, isn't it? But yeah, it's really frustrating. I've run into it so many times, and a lot rides on GMs. I think anybody who's been a GM can say a lot rides on being a GM because you are the ringmaster there. If people aren't having fun, it kind of feels like it's on you. So I can empathize a little bit with that feeling of, well, I don't know how to do this. So that's where I think where it also comes into of where it's important to have those resources and guides to other resources to where GMs can easily incorporate those kind of characters in. I mean, there's so many like NPC auto generators and stuff like that out there. Say auto generator, it's less auto generator and more kind of already pre-made, but like to where you can essentially buy or get free these characters to incorporate and you can tweak them. But once again, I've looked into those. Not many of them have well represented disabled people. So you keep running into this again and again and again and again where we're left out of the conversation. And education comes with exposure. So GMs have to be able to not be so afraid to misstep a little bit, I think, as part of it. You know what I mean? Because like when you take on a new rule set or a mechanic, it's always like, oh well, what if I mess it up, or what if it throws a wrench in the game? And I think anything that's like that comes from the same feeling. So I think they just have to. We all have to be okay with stepping out of our comfort zone a little bit. Not be so afraid to.
Yeah, Della?
And part of that is also normalizing disability in game art of characters. I think this is a great example. And yes, it's just because this is the first book at hand. But look at this. This is a freaking Power Ranger with a prosthetic leg.
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I that loops back to what we see is how we learn. What is displayed in every inch of media, books, all of it. It has to be normalized, just like somebody with a different hair color or different, seeing. I mean, there's been a whole conversation about how like feminine bodies are displayed on RPGs and different and games. Right. And how up until very recently, the way that was shown was, well, so there was one way that a woman could be shown in an RPG, and that was it. And if it was different, yeah. So it's that same way. You normalize something, and then it becomes a lot easier to bring it up on a topic of conversation because it's already been seen.
Yeah.
It lets your imagination wrap around it a little easier.
Like it's taken a lot more time for my disability in Witcher PDF because of this, because I really wanted GMs to also, walk away from it and be able to see how NPCs who are disabled could very easily be put into their games. And I've included, that there's a bit at the end which shows a couple example NPCs that they could put in their game with a guide on how to role play them. But throughout the document, there are things like role play tips. If you have a character in the party who is blind, why don't you describe things based more on the other senses rather than what they can physically see? Because obviously that character can't physically see or has very low vision. So, describe what they're hearing, what are they smelling, what can they feel? And, I've put tips like that in. And also at the introduction of like each section, I've tried putting in a short piece of like fictional writing that shows a character with that disability and how they're interacting with the world. So there's one with a deaf witcher and how he fights a griffin and kills it. And then there is one with a witcheress who is blind, and she goes into a necker nest and completely decimates them by hearing and knowing how to fight. And it's not like hearing is in like the superpower kind of hearing. She definitely cannot see, and like there is no way that it's meant to be like a superpower that negates her disability in any way. Like the whole Daredevil is blind, but he can technically still see, and it's like, no, thank you, like that isn't how it works. So I've made it very much that, this character is blind, this character is deaf, and what they do is they use their skills to work with their disability. And for mages and things like that, they use their magic as a disability aid, not as a means to negate their disability. So, you know, it's about being very frank, I found in the document, and giving examples of a wide array of different characters with disabilities, and normalizing it. And, you know, I've commissioned artwork to have these disabled characters in, to make sure that people can visualize and see them. And, you know, I think it very much adds to normalizing disability, and GMs are more encouraged, I think, to include it in their games and feel like they can include it in their games when they have things like role-playing tips and examples of like good representation NPCs, and examples of how they can describe a disabled character fighting, you know, like a huge dragon or something. You know, that if they have those examples, and it's normalized, they feel that they can bring that to their table and handle it well. So yeah, I very much agree with you on that GMs really do need a lot more encouragement, especially because, like you said, they're the ones that handle pretty much the entire game in terms of setting and who they meet and what they interact with. So yeah, I think it's, you know, really important that we encourage them.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say that, like, as a GM, whenever I like encounter something new, there is always that fear that I'm going to get it wrong or mess it up in some way and offend someone. But there's that fear, and then there's that letting that fear stop you. I have definitely pushed past, and I would encourage anyone out there listening to push past that fear and take the time and do the research. But I think not only will you make a player at your table more comfortable, will you make a more engaging game, but you'll increase your GM skill. Like, a note that I always have, like, around my computer is always like, describe a room in more than 2 senses, or at least 2 senses. Because, like, if you just describe what they see, like whenever I'm in like a dusty cave, it like smells rank and the dust gets in your nose and you feel like you need to sneeze, like that creates a more full body picture. And if I had to do that for every single place because of a character was blind and they couldn't see, so I had to do that for every room, talking about the smell or touch or taste of the room, that would just increase my skill. And I wouldn't have to have that note. I would just automatically do it. And I think that would increase my skill as a GM. And I'd be excited to have a blind character to, like, oh, please play a blind character. I want to work on this part of mine.
And just in terms of,
I
like,
run a game, Bite Marks, which is about werewolves, so I am always describing scents, and it is so awesome and evocative. Players love it.
Yeah, like in terms of senses as well, like I always say, like, do 6 senses, like, and the extra sense is the general vibe, because you do get general vibes from places when you walk into a room and it's like unpleasant to be in, like you immediately get a feeling that you don't want to be there. You know, like you can say that it feels eerie, and you can say why it feels eerie. Oh, it's too silent. To a blind character, that would be extremely strange, you know, for that to be like that way. Or for a deaf character, it could be, you know, that they see long dark shadows, and you know, not necessarily that they're hearing anything, but long dark shadows and seeing you know, like ominous movement in the corner of their eyes. Yeah, that's eerie. That they would want to leave. They know that that's a bad place to be in. So definitely, like, you know, give a general vibe kind of description as well. And yeah, like I think that's important. And I also think that with deaf characters as well, GMs do need to realize that, yes, when you're deaf, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are completely deaf and can't hear anything. Like, some people still can hear very, very loud noises. And if they do hear a noise, or a noise is loud enough, even completely deaf people can actually feel the vibrations on their eardrums, and it can be extremely unpleasant. So, you know, that disoriented can still apply. You know, and characters can become, you know, disoriented and confused by hearing a very loud noise. A deaf character very plausibly can. And I just think that that's something as well that GMs need to realize. And it's something that you would know, you know, if you do your research. And I think it should be something as well that core rule books, when they do address disability, it should be something that they explain, because it's such a commonly like overlooked fact. Like there are a lot of facts about disability that are just very often overlooked by mainstream media, or mainstream media has caused a lot of like misconceptions about disability. You know, so I think it's really important for GMs to know those things.
I was just gonna say, Beyonder Kev in the chat talks about how they were once GMing a game where one of the players was visually impaired, and it was a very challenging GMing experience, but they found that they had to provide a lot more description, like we're talking about, than they were used to. But it forced them to like kind of rethink how they were doing scenes, and I think that's like a really cool story.
Sorry.
I'd just like to say, if you are listening and you have more questions for the panel, feel free to ask them in the chat.
But absolutely, and Sarah, I'd also because I actually have a somewhat progressive, where my sight is slowly but surely bye. But blindness works on that scale as well, and most disabilities do. That's the thing. It's a sliding scale. It is genuinely unusual to have the more extremes. That's not to say it doesn't happen. It absolutely does. But it's more simplistic, I think, to display that, and that's why you see it so easily in the media, and so often when disabilities are displayed, to have those one sides of the other. I'm not super up to date with it terms, so I'm going to be careful here. Using a wheelchair of mobility is very, very similar to displayed in the same way. Frustratingly so, to where you were either, it's like somebody cannot walk or stand at all, or you then get the faking it trope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it comes a lot from that perception of this is like the language you shouldn't use, but calling people wheelchair bound. They are not bound to their wheelchair. You ask a lot of people who use them, myself included, that my wheelchair is very freeing. You know, it gives me my mobility back, and allows me and other people to do things that, you know, sometimes I don't have the energy for, or I'm in too much pain for. Using my wheelchair is completely freeing. And I think it comes from that like misconception again, that they seem to think that you're somehow super glued to your chair and you can never leave it. Like so yeah, like ambulatory wheelchair users are just something that the media doesn't account for.
My brain deleted the word. I was like, you could probably see it in my eyes, like the files being sorted through. Where's it at?
But yeah.
Charlotte, did you want to say something?
Games often have a mute flaw, but speech is a whole spectrum. It is not connected to intelligence, and it can be situational. I have friends who are hyperverbal in some situations and totally non-speaking in others, or who need to supplement spoken language with augmentative communication devices like what I use, because speech is exhausting. Assistive devices are, like Sarah said, very freeing.
Absolutely. I actually, as you can tell, I'm very verbal. I'm very verbal, but I do go non-verbal. I have moments where I simply can't put my words together, or if I do, it's not going to come out right. Well, more so than normal. And to a point where I've been trying to pick it up, but sign language is now, some basic signs have started to been used in my family. I'm looking into assistive communication devices just because it's really frustrating when you're trying to get something across, especially for me. I have trouble with my words when I'm in a panic attack, or if I'm just have had a high social day, or, you know, usually when my senses are more extreme. So yeah, it's the implication, I think, that assistive devices have to be this, that you're bound to them, I think comes from the same place that why disability is seen as a negative, is because it's instantly considered a flaw instead of just a thing. I really think it ties into that. I did want to say though as well, when it comes to descriptions and having to go outside your comfort zone as a GM, I think it really, because I think most GMs delve a little, correct me if I'm wrong, delve a little bit at least into writing, because it's the same framework. RPGs in general, they're the same framework as a writer. And I remember all those little writing practices they used to give us in like when we were first being taught how to do creative writing. I'm sure it's different everywhere, but describing like different senses you can, you know, what you feel, what you hear, what you smell, all those things beyond just your sight, which we often, people who can see, super heavily rely on in those descriptions. And the thing is some of those creative writing projects were really bad. Like those attempts weren't all good. Again, Amanda works with kids. I'm sure she's seen some stuff. And that's okay though. Yeah, like we've got to as especially with RPGs, we've got to move past this fear of I'm going to mess up and therefore it's going to ruin the fun. As a player, messing up is part of the fun. Like I can't even begin to tell you, and I'm sure everybody here has experience after experience where you've stepped into something as a player and it's created probably some of the funniest or some of the most entertaining moments you've ever experienced. I don't think it would be or is any different for a GM, and I think it's so important that we remind people of that, because that's going to be what allows people to step out of their comfort zones. Yep. And sorry, I'll stop. No, I'll stop for a second because I got another point. But
Joe, did you want to say something?
I'm sorry, me?
Yeah. No, Joe? Or
Oh.
I thought I heard Joe say something.
There was one funny story when I was playing Death Watch, where whenever you were hit and wounded, you like flipped the dice. It was percentile. So wherever you rolled, you'd flip it, and that's where it ended up being like the damage was dealt. Well, I was playing my character who had 2 fine hands, but it was just funny because the GM all of a sudden rolls, and he's like, he was like, "Oh crap, I just hit your right hand," and it was funny because again we're very close friends, but it was still like he quickly like double checked. It's like, "Nope, that was your knee." It's like just one of those like socially awkward situations.
And it's that's the thing. Knowing, and this actually goes to the point that I really wanted to talk about, which is outside of just the role play, establishing those boundaries as a GM. It's so important to lead that conversation when you start with a group. It's so important because your players aren't always going to feel comfortable with bringing up to you topics of where their lines are, safety tools, that kind of thing. What is important to them? So opening that door and going, not just so you can play these disabled characters, but so people with disabilities feel comfortable, or anybody feels comfortable knowing they're going to be in a safe environment to explore those things. Because we can't have any of this if
that type of conversation often is just already there with horror RPGs, and I don't see why it couldn't easily be extended to this as just a common thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, horror or RPGs, and which is kind of Vampire the Masquerade is horror, but it's like that weird drama horror thing. They have some tools. I don't think it's enough. I don't think most horror RPGs have enough because they have their own problems, but it's definitely, you at least open the door, right? And there is no reason except for it's just not there yet by default.
Yeah, I think with things like with like lines and veils and X cards and fast forward, rewind, pause, like you're starting to see these tools being put into tabletop role-playing games in general, but it is kind of like the community putting it in versus like the games having it in there. Although you are starting to see more games coming out, like Thirsty Sword Lesbians, that have it baked into the games. And Darla, I just got my physical book in the mail. I'll have you know. Yes, I'm very proud. But yeah, that thank you for bringing that up, Faith, because that's something I really wanted to talk about. We've talked a lot about how to make your game accessible for characters with disabilities or neurodivergency. But I would also really love to hear everyone's opinion on how to make a player at a table feel more comfortable. I think it's something we could all learn from. I think Darla has something she'd like to say to that, and I'd love to hear it.
In most games I am and I ask for a hard line over ableism. I deal with that enough in real life. I want to be able to exist as a disabled person in the game, and see a world of the game where ableism isn't constantly coming up everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always make it pretty much standard that whenever I do handouts, I make sure that they are in plain text, and I make sure there's one in open dyslexic font, and I say nothing about it. I just say, you know, download whichever one you need and take it. So no player has to, you know, quote unquote out themselves as disabled or needing, you know, assistance and accommodation, basically. And it shouldn't be accommodation, really. It should just be, you know, a staple in games, because it can make people feel very awkward if, you know, if you're trying to come from a good place and be like, you know, are there any disabled players? Who do I need to, you know, help with terms of game aids and equipment? Is the best way to do it is just have it be a staple at your table no matter what, because then nobody feels like they have to say anything, because a lot of the time people can feel like they're a burden for asking for additional things for a DM to do something for them. I mean, I know I used to be really like guilty of feeling very bad whenever I asked for like breaks or things. Is just make breaks regular, things like every an hour and a half, just get up and have a break. I also have a policy at my tables that a person can walk away from the table at any time, no problem, no questions asked. All I ask is that if they don't come back to the session, that they just send a text like later on just to let me know that they're safe and that they're okay. Like just things like that. I also have a sheet up on my Patreon, and I think it's available to everyone. But it's just a what can I do sheet, because a lot of the time rules can be very overwhelming, and it's basically a sheet. And I have like a plain text version, and I have an open dyslexic version, and it just goes through everything that your character can do. So it says, what can I do? And it says, on your turn, you can do one of these things. And it's like, take an action, move, cast a spell, and like it'll explain what you can do, and explain bonus actions and everything to you, because a lot of the time people feel very awkward asking the DM to repeat certain rulings and things. So having a physical kind of sheet that they can look at and, you know, refer to whenever they're using the character, especially when they're new, because like D&D can be super overwhelming the first time you play it. Even though 5th edition is meant to be like the easiest for people to come to, it's still overwhelming. It's a lot of text that you've got to get through. So I've just like kind of narrowed it down to the very base, and, you know, made it a lot more simple. Because it's really hard to think of what to do, especially when, like, you know, there's like a 50-foot dragon trying to eat your character and everybody's panicking. Like it's really hard to think of what to do. So yeah, having help sheets and things like that. And another thing that really irks me is when people say, or when DMs get angry at people using their phones. Especially if they are using them to have electronic dice rollers that read out the number on the dice. Like, that really annoys me. So like, oh, it's distracting. It's like, it's no different to someone rolling their physical dice on the table and shouting that they got a nat 20. It's no different. So, you know, there's no reason that somebody can't use a modulated dice roller that reads out the results for them. That's always irked me. So like I
Yeah.
just asked DMs
And
to
time
stop
limits
complaining.
for turns. Like I understand the need for them, but no.
Yeah, I've done the time limit thing before, but I've always made sure, like before the session, I say, okay, this bit's going to be time limited, and I let people know in advance, and we kind of stage the scene beforehand, so that
Right.
everybody kind of knows what they're doing and what they want to do. And if it gets too much, then I just scrap it, and I just say that it happened very quickly, like later on, and like get rid of the timer altogether, because I understand it can put a lot of pressure on. Like it's fun with certain groups so long as they are aware that it's going to happen,
Right.
that they have time to prepare for it. But overall, generally, like you said, like I wouldn't put it in because it's very stressful.
And that's
Yeah.
and this
Sometimes.
is sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that's with everything, right? So some of these things are going to be like needed for a group, but it's going to destroy another group. Like, I have some friends who I adore beyond all measure, but if you let them have electronics at the table, you are not going to see their brains active on the RP for the rest of the night. It's not happening. But they love dice and they're good with dice and they can do it. And we had for a little bit, we had physical calculators out and about because they knew, they were like, if I'm on my phone, I'm gone. So we pulled out the old little calculators that nobody uses anymore, and that's what we had at the table. And we all had one too, because I was like, well, we'll just put them out there, and that's it's being fluid in the rules where you can be being aware of your people. And we talk about session 0 a lot, I've noticed. Like that's a big thing, but it goes beyond session 0. It goes before and after and every time. It's so important to keep checking in. And for a lot of people with anxiety, it's kind of hard to, like you said, to be like, I know this is extra work and I don't want to do that to a person. So GM, sometimes you're going to have to mother hen your players. It's going to have to happen. I'm sorry, but it does. That's the best way to make sure that your players are comfortable for the most part. But sorry.
I was just going to say it's important to have a way for them to anonymously tell you something that they need to know, like a little text thing. And I was just going to say earlier that my favorite thing to do is, speaking of coloring books, sometimes I have trouble focusing on the game, so I need to be like I sometimes do a little coloring book and it's like some people would see that and be like, oh, you're not paying attention, but like, so I'm focused on the mindless activity, my brain can be actually listening, like Amanda with her knitting. Or crocheting. I can't see.
Yeah, at tables I've GM'd for, I've had people who find, like scribbling and just doodling, like to keep their hands busy, is really good for getting their brain to listen. It's essentially a form of stimming, really, to keep the brain focused. And I spoke to them about it. Is there anything I can do to make it more comfortable and stuff? And they talked about how they didn't like that when some players came, that they just assumed that they weren't paying attention at all, because obviously they're just doing random doodles. And so I went and bought books for them, like little old looking journals, and I said, well, why don't you keep it as like a journal that your character has written and drawn in.
That's awesome.
So they got to draw like characters that they met, and so their hands were focused, but like their brain was still focused on the game. And when players came and were like, what are you doing, like to them, they could be like, oh, I'm just keeping my journal, that's for my character. And they felt less pressured and less awkward, and they felt like they weren't being judged as badly. And I have spoken to players who kind of come to the table and are like, they're not paying attention. I'm like, I do have words with them now. But yeah, keeping journals as characters I found is really helpful. I do it myself as well, because I'm one of those people where my brain will wander if I'm not fully present on something. So if I'm fully concentrating, like my hands on a drawing, I can definitely like actually tune my brain in to listen to what the DM's saying.
And guess what? We all do that. That's where dice towers come from. Darla, I feel like you want to say something, and
This
then
is
JT.
also why making breaks a regular thing is important, but also recognize that some players need to get up and move where possible while still being engaged.
Yeah, JT, did you want to contribute something?
Oh, I was just saying that I GM online exclusively, sometimes paid GMing, which makes me feel even more pressured to get things right for everyone. But I going back to what someone said earlier about making it clear from the start that you are running an inclusive game. If there is something that is needed, it is not something that is going to be judged. You will work with them, make them feel comfortable and a part of things still. And that is really standard to every game that I run. And I've found that if I do that up front, almost like a contract, then they are at ease with coming to me and telling me, I have this issue. Can we work together on a way to make this more convenient to deal with as we go into the game, rather than me having to kind of cautiously edge up to them and say, do you need help with this, that, or the other? Just project that feeling that you're going to be inclusive. You don't have a problem with it. Please feel free to approach me if you want to work together to better your inclusiveness in the game.
Yeah,
I think
Amanda?
Amanda wanted to say.
Yeah, something I think that is extremely helpful is also just having a really forgiving like cancellation policy if someone can't come. I had played this game with friends that I just loved, and I needed to keep canceling because I was having seizures and going through a big med change. And while I was gone, the DM had initiated a change where they no longer did the recaps, and instead it was like player based. So not only had I lost like a huge chunk of a game that we'd been playing for almost 2 years, but then all of a sudden, like I had nothing to contribute from the very beginning. And then when I was playing, it was late at night and it was a long game, and I was so tired that by the next week, I'd flip through my notes, but they were like a garbled mess. So I ended up like being playing that I just told them I had to take a long break, and I'm still not playing with them right now. And I think that like just like Jay had said, like having all of that like there from the very beginning, and even just periodic reminders can be so helpful for players that they don't feel embarrassed to come back and say like, hey, my needs have changed, and this is what I might need you to do differently now. And that goes a really long way.
I think a big thing is examples, things that you've needed as a player or things that you've done in the past as a GM. Obviously, don't name names, but if you've created a different kind of setup for a player, their space, or you usually use a certain type of music, but or you have background music, but like for me, especially lately, background music right now would absolutely destroy my focus, which is weird for me because usually background music helps me, but lately it's been the opposite. So like, yeah, and tell them like, oh yeah, I've had to have this change before, or I've had players and we've worked with this change and I learned from that, or something maybe positive you got out of it, just to make sure that it's being clear that, hey, this isn't a burden, this is another part of the game, it's another way to be. Yeah, just making it as normal and as casual as possible, because that's what it should be. And examples have always been a huge thing for me. And I've noticed with other people as well. It just gives them a connection and makes it real that yes, you're not just saying that, because we live in a world where people are going to say that it's okay and do it when in reality they're actually kind of annoyed by it, and that puts people on edge and on their toes all the time. So those examples can make it kind of be a little more real, I think.
Yeah, an example I like to give, because it's an example that I asked my GM about, was there was an NPC who was very like sarcastic and very like dismissive of us as players, and it kind of ruined the power fantasy for me a bit, but also was like very reminded me of my days of like when I was a kid getting basically bullied by adults and the demeaned and like not thought of as like worthy of a one-on-one conversation type thing. And like it took me a while to like piece together like why did I have such a strong reaction to this NPC talking to us, and I would just shut down whenever they were talking to us. But I like talked to my GM about it, and they were like, yeah, cool. And the next time the GM was like much more favorable to especially my character or the NPC, and it was like much nicer. And it's a great example because it's like, hey, I am not a big scary GM that's perfect in every way. Like I need accommodations too, and we all do, and it's great. And I was able to have more fun and actually engage in that story because this is what I needed at the time. And like,
Right. And the no questions asked policy is a big one for me. I do tend to and like I said, I have like, we're gonna ratio it like 10% GM, 90% player. But in the experiences I've had and with some of the best GMs I've had, it is a no questions asked, but it's like if you want to share with me, you're absolutely welcome to, but you're never required to. Because you know, if that those reasons being shared can help improve things overall. And like you said, certain even like NPCs and story things are going to come up that are going to make people uncomfortable, and it's so important that throughout, because there's no way you correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't really realize that that was like going to be a thing for you, right?
yeah.
So right, that's where it comes in of like session 0 is not enough. You've got to keep hammering home of like you can always change those points.
Yeah, and this is true in a lot of different ways, but I really learned this running LARPs for kids. But like having those accommodations creates better role play, because if you're
Yes.
like, oh, I don't want to do that because it'll get in the way of the game, everyone will just shut down and they will not be having a good time, and they won't be their best role player, and they won't be engaging as much in the game, and it's going your game is going to fall flat. It just is.
Yep.
Like if you want to have engaging game, make combinations for people.
If there is one thing that any GM or any person really can take away, if you're interested in creativity at all, everything you do is going to have to be flexible. And if you're using an excuse that it's going to ruin the game, then you're not thinking outside of the box enough. That's like 98% of the time. There's always exceptions, but that's 98% of the time.
What's the phrase when you go outside and everyone's an a-hole, you're the a-hole?
Yep. Although you say that, I've been having trouble finding a group. I'm like, am I the problem? I'm just picky. Yeah, it comes down to it. It's like if you are going to be doing creative things and being in a creative game, that requires a certain fluidity that is gonna have to go beyond, oh, this will ruin my game. Okay, how? Because if you players, oh my goodness, if I could ever ask you of like to get your GM to think a little more, just ask them how it does that, because they're gonna struggle to find a reason, and then they're gonna be like, and if they're actually like, you know, gonna be a good fit for you, chances are they're gonna realize, oh, I'm just using an excuse. So, yeah.
That is also a red flag of a game you might not want to play.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I like to use the X card in this situation as well because that way, if someone is having difficulty interacting with the rest of the group or with the game due to an accessibility issue, but they're maybe embarrassed to bring it up in front of everyone, they've notified me privately that something happened and they were having an issue with part of the game. And then, like later on after the game, maybe I can approach them and say, "Hey, did you want to discuss what the issue was at that particular time so that I can, avoid that or improve upon that in the future?" And then they can tell me, what's up, what can I do better, and they don't have to feel as though they're putting it all out in front of the entire table.
Yeah, this is we've all talked about a lot of really great interesting things, and I feel like with most of the topics we have at Roundtable, we could go on for hours and there's so many things to talk about. But I would like to move into just some closing thoughts before we wrap this up. But before that, you all do a lot of amazing stuff and I've heard a little bit about it, but I'd like you to just take a second to tell everyone out there what it is you're working on, what it is they want to know about you, and pitch some of the stuff that you've been doing. I think we can go down the line the same we did at the start. So Sarah, would you like to go first?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sarah. You can go on my Twitter at Mustangs Art. That's pretty much where I do everything. My pinned tweet is the Combat Wheelchair version 2.1. It's completely free to download and use in your games. I don't charge anything for my disability content. And in about 2 months, maybe, there should be a PDF also free to download and use with the Witcher tabletop role playing game that covers disability as well. And that's going to have like artwork and all fancy, nice things in it. So follow me on my Twitter at Mustangs Art if you want to keep up to date with all of that. And also check out Untitled Games. I've worked for them on Cyberpunk Red with the cyber chairs, which are the wheelchairs in Cyberpunk. And also I have worked on the Witcher tabletop role-playing game as well in 2 new books that are coming out, which is Book of Tales, which is a whole bunch of adventures, and Tome of Chaos, which is an update to the magic system in it, including new characters. And the adventure in it is written by me and actually tackles certain things and themes and tackles, perceived ableism and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun.
Wow,
Check them out.
As a big Witcher fan, I'm excited for that. Darla?
I don't have anything to plug, but I did finish a successful Kickstarter in May for my zine, Dear Great Cthulhu, please stop giving me superpowers. It runs off the Belonging Outside Belonging engine, and you get to play heralds of the great old ones, who have been afflicted with random and bizarre powers by alien gods, and you just kind of have to learn to live with it. The game uses cosmic body horror as a metaphor for disability and queerness, and how we build and maintain communities, support one another, lift each other up, and sometimes you get to use your ability to weep plastic fire from your tentacles, but it makes you really hungry to maybe do some good. But you can also follow my itch.io page, where I will be posting a pre-order page closer to launch. I am at basic and bizarre.itch.io. I am on Twitter at basic and bizarre.
Okay. I have a friend whose head will explode when she hears about this game. So I'm just very excited to send it to her. I will be looking that up as well. Oh, I just have more games to play now. This is fun. All of these pitches are directed just directly towards me, apparently. JT?
Well, I run a YouTube channel called Legacy Art Games where I work with game developers and game masters to showcase accessible games for disabled and chronically ill gamers. 99% of the time, these games are donated by the developers, or seats at the GM's table are donated by them, so that we can showcase these games to people with various kinds of disabilities and show them ways that they can participate in the hobby and have a good time. And yes, uh, it was sort of an idea just off the top of my head, you know. I am homebound. What can I really add to the channel beyond PC gaming? And I thought tabletop. This is accessible in many ways. And I started asking GMs, would you let me be in your game in return for being streamed on the channel? And it was a big success. So lots of disabled players are now on the channel saying, hey, I got into a campaign and I had a lot of good time. So yeah, that's what I'm all about, is just uh, telling people some great things they can play, and letting them watch me fail in various campaigns, but trying my best, and that's really about it. And these kinds of events too. I think they're so very important that people facing these issues get together and talk to the community. So I love to be a part of that.
Great. Thank you so much. And Joe?
I really don't have anything to plug. I'm over on Twitter at One Handed Hobby. I just mostly post painting, retweet painting stuff. I like seeing more community stuff and like showing people's art and all that kind of stuff. So that's really all I got. Yeah.
But do you have your own coloring book?
No.
I'd look into that.
No. I don't. I just paint a lot of miniatures. Last year, I think I did about 600 or so because of the pandemic. So it was just, yeah.
Oh, after this
Wow.
stream, Rob, one of our GMs, who's a professional model maker and painter, is doing a stream of his DM game. So
Cool.
yeah, I mean, if people are interested to watch a game after this, after they get around, stretch, and drink some water, of course, feel free. That'll be happening right after this. And Faith?
Well, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades right now. I don't have anything specific to plug at the moment except for my Twitter, because that, if you want to know anything about me, that's where it's going to be, and it's at Satirical Faith, and the Faith is Feyth. Yeah, that's it. I know how to spell my own name. So yeah, I'm doing a little bit of everything. I'm going to be streaming on Twitch very, very, very soon, hopefully this week, now that I finally have everything set up. Probably video games, possibly Darkest Dungeon. So if you're into that kind of stuff, you know, come see me. I'll say hi. We'll say hi together. I'm also working on some graphic stuff, social media stuff. Just follow me on Twitter. There's too much. Like I said, jack of all trades. I'm figuring myself out.
Awesome. Aren't we all? And Amanda?
I suck at Twitter, so you can only find me on Instagram, where I'm Amanda Furiosa, and I post lots of cool bug photos, but also a lot of stuff about my incredibly active disabled life. And I am working on a program for masterminds right now that I'm super excited about, and I worked really hard on, and it's called Druidcraft, and we are going to be getting tiny human beings outside, and it's about like real life experiences outdoors, like making tinctures and salves and foraging and like ethical foraging. But also, I've worked really hard to make sure that this does not stop kids who live in the city and like don't have access to easy transportation from finding different things they can use in their immediate area. So that's my fun project.
That's
We're
really
talking
cool.
about kids, right?
So cool.
Tiny humans.
Okay. However, if anyone wants to like participate and y'all want to be my test people, I would love to to escort anyone, because it's basically all I do in my real life is run around the woods and try not to pass out and take pictures of things and make things out of it.
I live in the city, so I don't have woods around me. I just have train tracks that are still active.
However, you can find plantain and wild mustard. I've been to Jersey City. You can eat clover. You can eat Johnny Jump Ups. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily eat it from Jersey City, but you can at least photograph it and participate.
No, I mean there's a lot of trees and foliage around the train tracks. That's where I go hiking. With my three other friends
Necessarily.
who want to find it. It's just Stand By Me. My life is Stand By Me. I have something to promote as well. I run games for Mastermind Adventures. I have an ongoing campaign on Wednesdays at from 2 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. That is going really great. We just had an amazing session of a battle royale. And if you're like, you seem kind of cool, but not cool enough for me to pay for a game, I run 1 hour one-shots on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're like, I want to dip my toe into the chaos that is an Arthur run session, that's how you can do it. And if you're also like, D&D is not my jam, I run a bunch of other games as well. You can check them all on the Mastermind Adventures website, which is mastermindadventures.com, and you can read all the crazy games that I can run for you.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, does anyone have any closing thoughts they'd like to say to the audience? I know we're running a little bit over time, but I still want to give everyone a chance to say something.
Put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Yeah.
Didn't realize I was muted. Sorry. Just normalize disability at your table. That's the big one for me.
I would really agree. Don't make it a negative. Don't make it, don't make it like something that you have to take in order to be good, as if it's a reward, Just let it be a part of the character. Let it enrich the character and let it make them more of a complete person, whoever that may be. I would put it at that, yeah. And I would say as well, put it up front right at the beginning of the campaign before anything goes on. This is a non-judgmental, safe place. If you need any kind of help, just let me know. We'll work it out. That's what I would like to say.
Put more disabled characters in your game art. Other creators, make it visible and out there. Let us know that we are seen. Also, the picture I showed earlier was from Henshin, Ascente RPG, by Cave of Monsters. Totally recommend you check it out if you like Japanese superheroes and / or Power Rangers.
As well, leading on from Jay, if you want, kind of examples of nuanced characters who are also disabled, I do recommend coming to my Twitter lately, because apparently I can't shut up about Geralt of Rivia and how he's disabled, and all of his stuff. So yeah, you can come and check out threads on that where I talk about the nuances and how it builds up a character who's very complex. And I talk about it in a very neutral to positive manner, and how I think the show should represent it when it comes up, and how I think the books could have done better in representing it, and how I think the video games kind of toned a lot of it down. and not just in regards to Geralt, but in regards to a few characters as well. And I discuss it there. So if you're very interested in The Witcher, yeah, check out my Twitter and look at me go talking about Geralt all the time. So yeah. So if you're looking for guide on a nuanced character, yeah, please check out some of the threads.
Sarah, I gotta say, I was like, Witcher's cool. I should check out Witcher stuff. And then every little factoid and everything, I'm just like, well, crud. Now I really gotta check it out.
Look,
because I just became more and more interested. Yeah, absolutely. If I could scrap my own promotion and be like, hey, go over there, I would. It absolutely draws you in.
Geralt is my arthritic king, and I absolutely love him. So
I agree. JT, Joe, do you have anything to final words? Totally cool if not.
I got nothing.
I've sort of already been with mine. Just be upfront in your games that it's an inclusive, safe place where you can be whoever you are, and it's not a problem. Just welcome people. Let them be who they want to be. Not a penalty, not a reward. Just who they are.
Yeah. My clothing's thoughts are patronize and give money to and support these wonderful people over here. They do some amazing work that I'm excited to go check out after this, and you should too. But first, you should all get up, stretch a little bit, drink some water, take care of yourselves and your own bodies. And
sorry.
yes, stick around if you need to.
I don't think Sarah actually said. Sarah, did you say what your Twitter is?
I did. It's Mustangs Art, so MUSTANGSART. There you go.
Yeah, and we can probably put in the Twitch chat as well. But for now, thank you all for coming to our table and having this discussion with us. We will see you at the next round. Have a good night.
My pleasure.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Cool. And we are out. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome.